Okay, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the ISEP webinar today. We are very happy to have Nada Mamun from Helmut Schmidt University in Germany with us today to present some ongoing work on retirement decisions for coal-fired power plants in India. And what we're going to do today is Nada is going to first give a brief presentation of the work that we've done so far, some of the ideas that we have moving forward, and then at the end we are going to take any questions using the chat function. So once we get to the very end, and even also during the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the chat function. It's easier for us than the cacophony of everybody trying to talk at the same time. So Nada, please go ahead and run us through the work that you and others, including myself, have done, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks a lot, Johannes. So my name is Nada Mamun. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Hamburg, and I'm also a teaching and research assistant at the Helmut Schmidt University, which I'm based right now. And today we'll be discussing the identification of coal plants in India for early retirement, and we'll be presenting a work in progress about a multidimensional analysis or approach when it comes to retirement of plants. And the reason we're looking into this, into early retirements in general, and then specifically in India, as it has been discussed just a second. Yeah, so it has been a focus of discussion, whether from an overcapacity or an inefficiency perspective, or climate change concerns, as well as pollution concerns. The concern about the retirement of some of India's coal fleet has been coming up, especially in the past year. So let me introduce a bit of background on like the coal fleet of India, and to put it this way, and its capacity. Coal energy in India is considered to be the backbone of its power sector and its thriving economy. And currently, India accounts for 11% of global coal capacity, and it has one of the largest coal fleets worldwide, as well as one of the largest coal reserves. And as you can see from the plot, the newly operating capacity, or the growth of the Indian coal capacity, has faced an exponential reaching a peak around 2015 to 2016 growth, but have been slowed a bit over the past 5 years. And this slowdown could be associated with renewable energy or overcapacity, or both. So as we can see, the renewable energy in India has been rising. So this is the installed renewable capacity in India in gigawatts, and over the past 15 years or so, we can see a consistent rise in the renewable energy capacity. However, renewable energy is not fully expected to be a complete substitute for coal, but could explain a bit in the fall down in the utilization rates. And as we look at the right-hand side, the graph on the right-hand side, showing the capacity factors or the efficiency or utilization rates of the plants, we can also see that it has been consistently falling, where it started more than 70% and then is currently around 50%. However, the concerns when it comes to early retirement in India is not just the matter of overcapacity struggles or drop in renewable energy prices. There's also negative externalities resulting from India's coal-fired power plants, such as air pollution, also water stress, as well as climate concerns. So if we look at air pollution in India, air pollution ranks as the 5th cause of death. So ambient air pollution ranks as the 5th cause of death in India. And coal-fired energy is one of the biggest contributors to ambient air pollution, where 59% of the sulfur dioxide emissions, 25% of nitrogen oxides, as well as primary PM and mercury are resulting from the coal-fired energy generation process. Recently, India has significantly tightened the national emission standards of coal-fired power plants. Currently, at least 51% of those plants haven't followed through. So air pollution is one of the externalities that would benefit from a bit of retirement of the plants. Also looking at the water stress, water supply in India suffers from seasonal variability, and it's also heavily used in areas other than power generation, such as agriculture. And India ranks as the second most water-stressed countries compared to the other coal producers and consumers, the top coal producers and consumers. And coal combustion is very water intensive. It ranks as second in India after oil. And more than 70% of India's coal fleet is located in water-stressed areas. So water might also be one of the negatively affected environmental aspects when it comes to coal generation. But also, water shortages also is limiting when it comes to plant operability, and also already nationwide blockages have occurred due to water stress. Also, climate change is one of the environmental aspects that suffers from globally from the coal generation sector in general, as coal-fired energy generation is one of the largest contributors to carbon dioxide emissions compared to other fossil fuels. And the magnitude of India's carbon dioxide emissions play a role when discussing the global targets of climate stability and so on. As India is one of the coal is one of the main power or energy source in India, and India has one of the largest coal reserves. Also, given that the coal fleet is still growing, even if the growth is a bit slower than previously in the past 5 years. However, if current plants under construction operate their average lifespan, this would be pushing the carbon budget above the 2-degree limit. However, climate change is not, as to the extent of our knowledge, a big public concern in India compared to air pollution, for example, even though rural population depend on climate-sensitive sectors. So it could be also of interest. So when discussing early plant retirements, it's not just a matter of overcapacity. So this is one aspect of it, that retirements would reduce the underutilization and inefficiency problems, but also the environmental and health damages play a big role, because around 0.3 million deaths are attributed to the power sector emissions, and there have been severely proven health concerns when it comes to emissions from coal-fired generation, also considering the carbon dioxide emissions. But also, if we look at the renewable energy sector, where the costs have dropped almost to half over the past 2 to 3 years, as well as the new policies on emission mitigations, which require plans to include anti-pollution controls, which are also a bit expensive. All this leads up to the idea that plant retirements might be inevitable. So the question is, when we discuss then plant retirements, what would be the rank, or how would we identify the plants when it comes to this retirements? So what is the commonly used approach in this literature would be to retire older plants first, as older plants are usually less efficient. They're also more pollution intense and are less costly to retire, given that their future value is lower. However, there's also some studies that show that smaller plants might be ideal for early retirements, given that their pollution to energy generated ratio is disproportionate. Also, inefficient plants make perfect sense to retire. However, all these approaches only consider the technical aspects of the plant, its age, its efficiency, the capacity size, but do not really consider the environmental impact of those plants, which we consider in this paper to be a very important factor as well if we're going to identify plants. So if we want to identify like a feasible schedule for retirement in case India has to retire some plants, we think that environmental impacts should be as well considered in addition to technical aspects. So what we do basically is we have 247 plants across 20 states in India. And the main variable of interest we have plant level characteristics, which are the technical aspects that include age, the capacity factors, which are like the efficiency rate, the coal generation technologies, whether it's critical, subcritical, supercritical, and the distance to the coal source. We also account for environmental impact as discussed. So we have population exposure to emissions, we have emission factors or the emission intensity per plant, and we have the water stress level. So all these data is on a plant level. We also include state level power supply so that the schedule is as feasible as possible or as sound to the local context as possible. So we include the renewable energy potential per demand, as well as the surplus and deficit per state. So surplus and deficit in the power supply per state. So looking at the plant level variables to start with, so we have age. As you can see from the map, so the plants in India range from 0 years to 1 year old to 51 year old, and on average we can see that very little states have an average like plants averaging age more than 20 years old. So the Indian coal fleet is relatively young. Also capacity factors or the efficiency measure that we use, which is the total annual generation over the nameplate capacity, multiplied the days of operations and hours. We can also see that the average per state in India have only few states have capacity factors higher than 55%. Other than that, they're lower, which points towards higher inefficiencies. From the 247 plants that we have, they're mostly operating on subcritical technology, with only 23% using supercritical. None of the plants in our data utilizes ultra supercritical, for example. We also measure the distance from coal mine or port, and what we use is basically the minimum distance. So we use a very simple measure which computes the minimum distance from a coal plant to either coal port or coal mine, and we compute the linear distance and the driving distance using the Google Distance Matrix API. And these, as you can see in the graph, are the average minimum distance per state. So basically the minimum distance per plant and then averaged over the number of plants per state. This measure is very simple, suffers also from some limitations that we're going to discuss maybe further throughout the presentation when we discuss the further ideas to enhance the study. I'd also be looking forward to hearing comments from you on this part. Then we look at the environmental impact variables. So first we have the population exposure. And to compute the population exposure, first we employ a high split model using a forward trajectory analysis in order to estimate the end location of the pollutants. And then we use the population count from the gridded population of the world data set to see the number of population or the population count exposed to the pollutants as per estimated by the high split model. So basically to compute the population weighted damage for plant I, for example, what we would be doing is basically weight the pollutants by the capacity, since we don't have the exact number of pollutants per plant, but we assume that the larger the plant, the more pollution, the more polluting it is. And then we multiply by the number of population living in this area exposed to this plant. As you can see in the map, we can see that there are some states where the population exposure is relatively higher. For example, Uttar Pradesh or West Bengal, as compared to some other states like Punjab, where population exposure is a bit less. We use water stress as a measure for the water supply issue. So it's basically the ratio of fresh water demanded over the supply of fresh water. Plants using seawater for cooling and so on do not suffer from any water stress according to our data. We also use carbon emission factors to proxy the emission intensity per plant, which is basically the carbon dioxide emitted per plant as a result of the electricity generation process. As you can see also on the map, some states suffer from higher emission intensity as compared to other states. Then we include the state level variables, which is renewable energy potential per power demand. We average over the last 3 years. So we have state level renewable energy potential and state level power demand. And basically we normalize the renewable energy potential by the power demand per state. We also include the surplus or deficit in power supply per state. As far as the data shows, in the last 3 years, there hasn't been power surplus, but there has been deficit in some states, as you can see in the map as well. So basically, the main index then is formulated of these 9 variables, the 4 technical aspects, the 3 environmental impact, and the 2 state level variables. They are standardized and given, till now we have applied like an equal weighting scheme. However, this is also subject to change once we advance with the project a bit. And the idea is that plants that have higher index values are of a higher priority to be retired, meaning that plants that are less efficient and more emission intense would have a higher probability of ranking higher in the index as compared to plants that are more efficient, let's say. So here's the preliminary results, so to say. So we identified top plants for early retirement. These are the top 10%, which would be top 25 plants for retirement. They are on average larger in terms of capacity, but they're less efficient. As you can see in the bar plots, the lighter shade, or the bars on the left-hand side, are the bars representing the remaining 90% of the plants, and the bars on the right-hand side are those representing or expressing the values for the top plants to be retired. So looking at the age doesn't seem to be significantly different. However, looking at, for example, the population weighted damage or water stress, we can see a difference. Also, plans recommended for early retirement are majority state-owned plans as compared to central or private. And you can see the average index weight per state. So some states have a much higher index, average index, let's say Punjab, as compared to states with lower index rates such as West Bengal. So the idea of the paper basically is to compare how a comprehensive index that includes environmental impacts as well as state level power supply situation would differ from a simply technical, or like the commonly used approach of a completely technical index. So we do compare the results of our index when it comes to the relevant dimensions that we include as compared to the other technical indices. So we formulate 3 other technical indices, one based on age only, which applies the oldest first strategy, another one based on age and size of the plant, where optimally smaller plants and older plants would be of a priority to retire. And then on the right-hand side, the rightest bar would be representing an index including the age, the capacity, smaller plants versus larger plants, and the capacity factor. And what we can see from the bar plots so far is that on average, plants that would be recommended for retirement based on technical indices only would be of a smaller negative, would have a smaller negative environmental impact, looking at the population weighted damage, for example, or the average water stress levels. This is obvious. So as a preliminary, again, conclusion to the work in progress is that what we find is that it's important to address early retirement with a comprehensive process rather than a simply just including the technical aspects. And this is what we do in this multidimensional index. Is basically we want to include not just the technical characteristics of a plant, rather also the environmental impact, as well as the state level power supply. Also looking at the results, the comparison between the main index, which is a more comprehensive index, compared to the to the technical indices, we find that the multidimensional index targets plants with worse environmental impacts and higher RE potential. So currently it's a work in progress, and we want to address some of the limitations, and I would be very much looking forward to your comments and on how to make either the measures better fitting to the Indian context, or in general to make adjustments to make the project more cohesive. So looking forward to your comments.
So thank you, Nada. Before we get to the comments, if I may request, I think it will be helpful if you say a few words about the next steps, because some of the questions we are already getting are actually directly related to those. So if you summarize the next stage of the project, I think that will be very helpful.
Okay. So what we're looking forward, or what we're looking to do in the coming steps is basically, first of all, to the extent of our knowledge, there's it came to our knowledge recently that each coal plant is associated with a specific mine. So it's not randomly assigned based on distance, rather that there's a specific connection or association. And we're looking into having data on that so that we're able to have a clearer distance variable. We also want to consider different variable weights. So currently we have a very simple index consisting of equal weights, which might not be also very applicable, as not all variables play the same role. So we want to have a more detailed weighting scheme. Also considering the efficiency measure, currently we use the capacity factors. However, we could also dig a bit deeper. What we plan to do is basically have a more complicated efficiency measure that could be more reflective of how really efficient or the utilization of the plant, rather than other exogenous limitations to the plant.
Okay, great. I'll just add one thing. Nada, I don't think you can think of the capacity factor as efficiency. It's just telling you how often the plant is running. So you can think of it more as a utilization measure. The efficiency would come from a heat rate or something like that. Now, Nada, there's quite a few questions in the chat already. So I would suggest that you just go ahead and start addressing those, and we'll go forward from there.
Okay, give me a minute. Okay, so the first comment, I think Johannes addressed it, that capacity factor is not inefficiency. That was a mistake on my side, so apologies for that. Let me check if Buharat had the low distances. So apparently it does have the lowest distances. However, we do need to address our distances measure a bit, but I would be really interested to hear from you on how we can adjust that better. So yes, you did see it correctly. So one comment that mentions true for imported coal, but not for local ones. Would you please refer me to where in the slide so I can clarify, maybe, or at least put down the comments?
The point about Gujarat. If Gujarat imports a lot through the ports, then that would explain why the distance is so short.
Okay. Okay, just a second. Yes, so the comment on cost generation, fixed and variable, we do want to take that into consideration, and this is also one of the steps we want to do when discussing efficiency, where we don't just discuss the efficiency in generation, but also in terms of cost, at least as far as I discussed with my colleagues. I would also be interested if you want to clarify more on how we can measure the cost or include them. But I do agree. So cost really is an important factor. So some clarifications, maybe that wasn't clear in my presentation. So the observation is on a plant level, not on a unit level. That's first. Second is, so the idea of including the renewable energy potential is not as a complete substitute. So I think that was also one of the things mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that renewable energy is not expected to completely substitute coal. However, if we're going to discuss early retirement of some of the coal fleet, then maybe taking into consideration alternatives for energy supply in this area would make sense. Okay, I'll check the carbon dioxide numbers. I wasn't aware of that. We don't know the source of coal, or do you mean the port versus mine? So until now, we don't have data on whether the plant uses imported or domestic coal, if this is relevant to your question. However, what we did basically with the simple measure of distances is to use the minimum distance, either to port or mine, which is again is a very limited measure that needs to be adjusted, and this is what we plan to do in the coming steps. The data source for the plant load factors is from the CEA monthly generation. We used the data average over the 3 years from 2015 to 2017, so that it corresponds with the other variables that we have in our data. So maybe this is why, or this would explain why it's a bit different from the most recent report. The source for the largest ambient air pollution, let me check real quick. So these are available in the slides. Maybe it was a bit too small, but it's probably Overshelp et al. Okay, that's very interesting information to me, that each plant gets a mixed or a hybrid of supply. But thanks a lot for your comments. They're all very helpful. So regarding the weights, we do want to make a more appropriate weighting scheme. So your suggestion is really helpful. And the timelines of the release reports, basically, we use reports until 2018. So, and for some variables such as the renewable energy potential, as well as the capacity factors, what we do is we get the average over the last 3 years. This means we use the reports from 2015, 16, and 17. So 2015, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18. I don't get the last question, Shanda.
Which one?
What is the plan after retirement is planned, as it has linked social and economic issues? Or?
That came from Serbi. So if Serbi can like reiterate, he's saying retirement has social and economic issues.
Okay. Well, can they clarify a bit? In what sense do they mean? In terms of employment or unemployment issues and so on?
Oh, is there any proposal to repurpose the sites? Yes.
So we were planning also on trying to include that a bit in our index because of the loss of employment opportunities when it comes to coal plants. This is why it's not a very easy topic to address, let's say. But we do want to account for that because it is one of the costs, obviously, of something like that. But until now, we are still working on it. So I don't have like a clear answer right now, but we do want to include it in our analysis at some point. Thank you. Good question. Hopefully in a few months, depends on how long it takes. I think I got all questions.
There's a question from Hero about environmental impact.
Oh, okay.
Consider.
Mm-hmm. So far we don't include what kind of coal they're using. Environmental impact true would be affected by something like that. However, I have to check if we have the data available. I think we can get it. We have to check. But so far, as far as this analysis or the preliminary results did not include the kind of coal. But thanks for the recommendation.
Nancy asks, how do you capture balancing due to BRE in the picture? States like Gujarat have to back down thermal plants due to erratic winds.
So far, we haven't included that in our work. Any other comment?
Shreya asks, in a lot of other countries across the world.
To the extent of my knowledge, I'm not very sure if natural gas is a big player in the Indian in the Indian power sector, but maybe correct me if I'm wrong. As far as I know, there have been regulations to include anti-pollution controls and so on. I know that there have been some work on retirements, but I wouldn't say forcing. And thank you, Raul, for the link. So gas contributes very little, around 6 gigawatts. We don't have a minimum age for the retirement. So basically we use age in the index as one of the variables. Optimally, older plans would be retired faster than younger plans, keeping all else constant. However, the index has also other variables, so it might be that the recommended plans for retirement are not the oldest plans. Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think their list was also based on technical aspects rather than environmental impacts.
Someone asked if you can share the list of 25 plants that you are considering, and are you consulting with CEA?
So we're using data from CEA. We're not consulting them directly for the sake of this project, if that clarifies. Let me check if I can get access to the plans right now. I mean, given that it's work in progress, I would say the current 25 or the top 25 plans would not make sense to be shared right now. However, wait for the final results, then you can get them. As far as I know that there have been regulations for the installation of the FGD. I don't know if it has been enforced already or not, but as far as I know, I think in 2018, 2019, it became mandatory. But so far, around 51% of the plants are not really complying.
Excellent discussion. Thanks everybody for weighing in. Are there any other questions or things for Nada? So in terms of next steps, it will take us several months to complete this work because first of all, we need to bring in the efficiency and cost variables as well as improve distance metrics. And most importantly, we are thinking of doing an expert elicitation survey for the weights. So therefore, some of you might in fact get some email from us in the coming months to participate in the survey. But again, terribly useful comments, really appreciated. One thing I already see, there's a lot of skepticism on the state level measures. So one thing now that we can consider is we could consider just dropping them and replacing them with the efficiency and cost measures. Because it doesn't seem like people are very convinced with the renewable energy and all those arguments. But thanks everybody again for joining us. You will hear from us again in hopefully in a few months once we make some more progress on this and can come up with improved recommendations for retirement and closure. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.